Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Tips to help people choose a reputable tax preparer. Tax tip 2021-14, February 5th, 2021. Whether taxpayers regularly use a tax professional to help them file a tax return or they have decided to work with one for the first time, it is important to choose a tax return preparer wisely. There's a link to choose a tax return preparer here. So again, note that when you're thinking about the tax preparation process, there's two things you have in mind. One, I want to get this year's immediate tax return done, get a refund for it, get that as fast as possible if possible. But number two, I want to think about how to make the process as easy for the future as possible as well. So possibly having a situation where I have tax planning if needed, and if there are any problems with my return, having support with that if needed. Note that if your tax preparation is fairly simple, meaning you have a fairly basic type of tax return, for example, your adjusted gross income is below a certain threshold, you don't have a whole lot of income, in other words, possibly you're not doing things like a business if you don't have a separate Schedule C, because the Schedule C complicates the return a lot. If you have a separate Schedule C, you can do that on your own, but again, it complicates things a bit as well, so you might want to look for help at that point in time. If your income is just basically the W-2 type of income that comes from an employer mainly, that's going to be a more basic type of return. Then, and you don't itemize, for example, meaning you take the standard deduction, you're not taking the itemized deduction. If those are the case, then you might be able to satisfy just the immediate need of doing the tax preparation, and you might not need as much like tax planning or support in the future because you could basically handle the tax preparation possibly with the help of software. The software that could be the proprietary software, but there are free options for it. So you might actually have free options for the software, which you can find or look for on the IRS website at IRS.gov and look up free file options. Those will typically take you to links to third parties that will offer free file components of their software if you're under certain thresholds, say for adjusted gross income and so on. The interview process of those softwares giving an added level of support, making it easier to just prepare the tax return and understand the tax return just in the format of the software, the way it's set up. Now, if you do have a more complex return, then you might, of course, want to be choosing a tax preparer. When you're choosing a tax preparer, you still have the immediate need of needing to basically get the tax return done and try to get a refund as soon as possible and stuff like that if you're eligible for one. But you possibly have a more complex return, and you also want to basically make a relationship with the tax preparer because you're going to need added services. Possibly one, you're going to obviously need next year's tax return to be set up, so you would like them to still be around next year if you can do this, because that'll make the process a lot easier because they can typically use the same software and whatnot. And two, you would like them to be around if the IRS has questions due to the fact that your tax return is now more complex. Then there might be more questions with it, and it might be a little past our common knowledge of just knowing how to do the tax return. So we might want someone to be there to help in the event that the IRS comes back and asks questions. The IRS typically having 3 years at least for the statutes of limitations to come back and ask questions about a particular return. We also want to have questions about planning at that point in time. If we have our own business or adjusted gross income is getting higher then, and we have, say, itemized deductions, we might have planning questions that we want to be asking the IRS in addition to the immediate need of just preparing the tax return in the current year. So in that case, then you want to be thinking about your tax preparer and who you're going to be choosing. And I would suggest then that you want to be choosing someone that you're going to have a long-term relationship with if possible. So taxpayers are responsible for all the information on their income tax return. This is true regardless of who prepares the return. So note that a lot of times when people they get a tax preparer and they basically think, well, now I've got a tax preparer. They're the ones that are responsible. They're the ones that should have the knowledge, hopefully, but they're not necessarily, they are not the ones that are going to be primarily responsible for the return because they're basically acting as an agent. So even if you don't know everything about the tax return, you want to have a general idea of what's going on in the tax return, review the tax return, and hire someone that you trust, because if the IRS has a question about the tax return and they could come back normal statute of limitations within 3 years and ask about it, you want to make sure that you're dealing with someone who's going to be trying to do the tax return in good faith, and so that process will be as easy as possible. And the IRS again will come back to you typically as the taxpayer, as the primary person responsible, although the tax preparer should be preparing and showing the information about them as a pay preparer on the return as well. So taxpayers are responsible for all the information on the income tax return. This is true regardless of who prepares the return. Here are some tips to remember when selecting a preparer. Check the preparer's qualifications. People can use the IRS directory of federal tax return preparers with credentials and select qualifications. So there's a link to that here. This tool helps taxpayers find a tax return preparer with specific qualifications. The directory is a searchable and sortable list of preparers. Check the preparer's history. Tax preparers can ask the local Better Business Bureau about the preparer. Check for disciplinary actions and the license status for credentialed preparers. There are some additional organizations to check for specific types of preparers. So you want to check the history of the preparer. What you really want to think about is usually you're looking for a preparer that's been around for a while. They have an established type of business, because that would be more likely if they have an established type of business that's been around for a while. They're not doing a scam. They're looking at it at the long term. A scam means that someone's only going to be around for the short term, and it usually involves some kind of deceit, right? That means that you have a business that looks really good, but they've never been here before. They showed up out of nowhere, and now they're probably going to disappear out of nowhere like next year or something like that, right? You don't want that. You want someone who has an established business that's looking for the long term, and that's usually what you're kind of keeping in mind. So enrolled agents. So you can go to the Verify Enroll Agent Status page on IRS.gov. So enrolled agents are one form of tax preparer that has a credential for it that you might want to look into. We have certified public accountants. Check with the State Board of Accountancy. So a certified public accountant has different kind of credentials, but they're going to be pay preparers as well. The enrolled agent is typically going to be geared specifically towards the IRS and representing, possibly related to the IRS and whatnot. The certified public accountant has similar kind of abilities there, but it's more broad there. So you have kind of a general kind of accounting knowledge with the certified public accountant. So therefore, to deal with the tax preparation for individual tax preparation, both probably would be good. If you're dealing with accounting questions like preparing your Schedule C type of business, and you got questions about how to record certain entries and debits and credits and this and that, then the certified public accountant credentials may be more expansive kind of in that area. And then you have attorneys. Check with the State Board of Association. So attorneys have more expansive kind of ability to act as agents in general. Obviously, attorneys can act as agents for things other than the tax court or related to attorneys other than the IRS, acting kind of like as an agent in that regard if necessary, and it's more broad. So again, the attorneys probably, if you have kind of things that are outside of normal tax type of preparation type of situation, then the attorney would be more broad. In that case, they're probably not as specialized unless you have an attorney that is specialized in accounting type of situations like debits and credits and the financial statements and whatnot like that. I would assume that the attorneys would probably charge more. The CPA might charge more for a basic type of return. The enrolled agents for an individual tax return that doesn't need the added accounting needs and whatnot may be cheaper. So, but that's just it depends on obviously the individuals and their specializations and whatnot. So ask about service fees. People should avoid preparers who base fees on a percentage of the refund or who boast bigger refunds than their competition. So obviously, if the tax preparer is saying, I'm gonna charge you based on the refund I get you, they're not supposed to do that, because that gives an incentive for the preparer to then boost up the refunds, and artificially possibly by taking very aggressive stances or by flat out lying, which you don't want to do, because again, you're primarily responsible for the tax return preparation. So hopefully you should be looking at a tax preparer that's boasting that they're going to do it properly to give peace of mind, so that if you are audited in the next 3 years statute of limitation, then you have some peace of mind about it. You're not going to be worrying about it all the time. So ask to e-file to avoid pandemic-related paper delays, taxpayers should ask the preparer to file electronically and choose direct deposit. So most tax preparers, almost every tax, I would think at this point, are using some type of software. Just it's beneficial to do so at this point. And if they're using tax software, then of course e-filing would be the easiest thing to do. That's what the IRS kind of wants at this point. And if you're getting a money back, then the direct deposit would be the fastest way to do that, and the tax preparer should have the capability of doing that. So make sure the preparer is available. Taxpayers may want to contact their preparer after this year's April 15th due date. So note again, like it'd be nice that if your tax return is more complex, that you're dealing with someone that it's not just to meet the immediate need. You're dealing with someone at that point where you're thinking, hey, I'm going to have more than 1 year's need here. I'm going to have to build a relationship for next year. I'll build a relationship in case I have questions from the IRS and possibly for tax planning. So provide records and receipts. Good preparers will ask to see taxpayers' records and receipts. They'll ask questions to figure things like the total income, tax deductions, and credits. So note that, it's kind of annoying. It can be annoying that the tax preparer will keep coming back and asking possibly questions about the records and whatnot, but it's good that they pick those up instead of ignoring possible deductions or the resources to be available in case of an audit or something like that, so that they're looking forward to make sure that things are both, you got all the deductions that are in place in the current year, and that if you do have an audit or something like that, yours lined up to make it as easy a process as possible. So never sign a blank return. Taxpayers should not use a tax preparer who asks them to sign a blank tax return. That means that the tax preparer, if you paid the tax preparer, then you're still primarily responsible. The IRS is going to come back to you, but the IRS does want the tax preparer information. They're required to do that and provide that to the IRS if they are a paid preparer. So if they don't do that, if they have you sign a tax return and they don't give the IRS their information, that's not a good sign, so you don't want to be dealing with that typically. Review before signing. Before signing a tax return, the taxpayer should review it. They should ask questions if something is not clear. Taxpayers should feel comfortable with the accuracy of the return before they sign it. So note, when you hire a tax preparer, they're acting as the agent. So basically, you're still primarily responsible. And it's kind of difficult because obviously most people, if you have a more complex return, don't have really the knowledge to know everything about the tax return. They're kind of dependent, at least to some degree, on the tax preparer, which is why you want one that you trust. But you also want to be able to ask questions to be able to verify, to some degree, that the thing is accurate, right? Because you're the one that's primarily responsible for it. So review details about any refund. Taxpayers should confirm the routing and bank account numbers on their completed return if they're requesting direct deposit. If someone is entering an agreement about other methods to receive their refund, they should carefully review and understand information about that process before signing. Ensure the preparer signs the return and includes their PTIN, PTIN. All paid tax preparers must have a preparer tax identification number, a PTIN. By law, paid preparers must sign returns and include their PTIN on the return they file. So that's part of the information for the tax preparer has to provide to the IRS, and they should have the PTIN number, so make sure that they got that when you're doing the tax return. The taxpayer's copy of the return is not required to have the PTIN on it. So report abusive tax preparers to the IRS. Most tax preparers are honest and provide great service to their clients. However, some preparers are dishonest. People can report abusive tax preparers and suspected tax fraud to the IRS. Use Form 14157, Complaint Tax Return Preparer. There's a link to that here. And there's also a link to more information down below, how to choose a tax return preparer as well. There's links to those here. There'll be a link to this in the description.